There's a city in America where GPS directions can tell you to drive up a staircase, where streets legally exist but cars physically can't go, where you might live 200 feet from your neighbor but need to descend into a valley and climb back up just to say hello. This is Pittsburgh, and it's built differently from every other American city. Pittsburgh is often said to have around 446 bridges, with locals claiming it beats Venice by 3 and ranks among the most bridge-heavy cities on Earth. But unlike Venice, a huge portion of Pittsburgh's bridges exist to leap over dry land and empty air between hilltop neighborhoods hundreds of feet apart, but completely cut off from each other. The city also maintains 800 sets of public staircases, containing over 45,000 individual steps, many of which are legally classified as streets on city maps. None of this was planned, no architect drew this up, and no city planner chose this layout. So how did one American city end up as the complete opposite of all others? Phoenix and Denver sprawl outward across flat ground in predictable grids. Houston paved over 670 square miles of flat land, but Pittsburgh built vertically, stitching together 90 isolated neighborhoods across stretches of land so broken up that only a small fraction of its surface area is flat enough to build on. When you look at Pittsburgh from above, the city's neighborhoods scatter across the landscape with no obvious pattern. A 2006 study by the University of Toronto and the London School of Economics flagged it as one of the most sprawling big cities in America. This sounds like a criticism of car-heavy planning, except Pittsburgh's sprawl doesn't come from highways or parking lots. In many parts of Pittsburgh, huge chunks of the space between neighborhoods aren't developable at all. These include ravines, hillsides, and valleys that separate one buildable area from the next. Pittsburgh sits on the Allegheny Plateau, and this name is misleading as it suggests flatness. The hilltops sit at roughly similar elevations across the region, but the land between them drops into deep cuts and valleys. The entire city exists within this huge band of vertical space, meaning that within the span of a few city blocks, the ground could drop the height of a 60-story building. A massive share of Pittsburgh is steep hillside and slopes. Geographers call this a dissected plateau. This means that the surface looks relatively uniform from a distance, but is actually broken into isolated elevated platforms separated by slopes too steep to cross casually. The city can't grow outward in a continuous wave because the buildable land exists as scattered islands. Each hilltop plateau becomes its own isolated neighborhood, and Pittsburgh contains 90 such neighborhoods, and many of them function as genuinely separated communities. But recognizing that the city is broken up doesn't explain how it functions. If neighborhoods sit isolated on hilltops with valleys between them, how does anyone move through the city at all? Pittsburgh's approach to this question was to basically overbuild infrastructure. Tunnels, bridges, stairways, rail lines, anything that could cheat the terrain. The city tried to tackle its challenges by becoming the most over-engineered city in America. The Fort Pitt Tunnel opened in 1960, and it does something rather unusual. You drive through it in darkness for a while, and then the skyline of the city appears all at once with no gradual approach. Just tunnel, then city, in a single reveal. Because Pittsburgh's downtown sits in a tight wedge where 3 rivers meet, the only clean way to reach it from the south is to punch through Mount Washington, a 450-foot wall of rock. Without it, drivers would need to navigate switchbacks carved into slopes never designed for modern traffic. The Fort Pitt Tunnel connects to the Fort Pitt Bridge, often described as the world's first computer-designed bowstring arch bridge when it opened. To fit the bridge's double-deck design, the inbound tunnel portal sits 30 feet higher than the outbound portal. Drivers entering the city descend through the mountain at a different elevation than those leaving. The Liberty tunnels opened earlier, in 1924, as some of the first tunnels designed specifically for automobiles. Not long after opening, traffic jam caused a dangerous buildup of carbon monoxide. Engineers had to immediately install a massive air system, which still operates today. And then there are the bridges, all 446 of them. The Smithfield Street Bridge, which opened in 1883, is one of the oldest steel bridges still operational in the United States. The Roberto Clemente, Andy Warhol, and Rachel Carson bridges form a rare trio of nearly identical suspension bridges, even by global standards. What makes Pittsburgh's bridge count differ from Venice's is that Venice's bridges cross water, a predictable obstacle. Pittsburgh's bridges leap over gaps in its geography. The Belfield Bridge in Oakland used to span a ravine until the city decided to fill the entire ravine with earth to create a park. The bridge is still there, buried under tons of soil, because removing it was harder than just building over it. These tunnels and bridges solve the vehicle problem. But what about everyone who still needs to climb from valley floor to hilltop on foot? In the late 1800s and early 1900s, Pittsburgh steel mills sat on the valley floors next to the rivers. That's where the ore and coal arrived. That's where the furnaces ran. And that's where the heat and smoke made the air almost unbearable. Steelworkers needed to live somewhere, and they chose the hilltops, where the air was clearer and cooler. But getting from home to work meant descending hundreds of vertical feet every morning and climbing back up every evening. The solution to this unsustainable challenge was to build 800 sets of public staircases carved directly into the slopes. Over 45,000 individual steps. Stack Pittsburgh's city steps into one climb, and you're talking tens of thousands of feet of elevation gain, a ridiculous amount of vertical movement for a city. The city classified these stairs as legal streets, giving them official names and addresses. Some appeared on maps as paper streets, which meant they existed legally even when they weren't drivable like normal roads. This created a parallel transportation network with the vertical grid operating alongside the horizontal one. Early GPS systems couldn't tell the difference between these two networks. The software saw a street on the map, calculated the shortest route, and told drivers to take it. Imagine following your GPS through Pittsburgh's hills, turning where it tells you to turn, and suddenly you're staring at a 100-step staircase. Entire hilltop communities of workers depended on these stairs. Maintenance crews kept them clear in winter. Neighbors used them to visit each other without descending to the valley floor and climbing back up on the other side. The stairs stitched the vertical city together in ways that roads never could. But stairs could only do so much. The steepest slopes required something more. Mount Washington rises 450 feet above the rivers. Climbing that on foot is exhausting. Driving requires navigating switchbacks that weren't designed for modern traffic. So, in the late 1800s, Pittsburgh built funiculars, cable-driven rail cars that go straight up and down steep grades. At one point, the city had dozens of them. Today, only two remain, the Monongahela Incline, which opened in 1870, and the Duquesne Incline, which opened in 1877. They're among the oldest continuously operating funiculars in the United States, still in use, but mostly for tourists now. The inclines represent a particular kind of engineering compromise. They're slow and carry relatively few people compared to a subway or bus line, but they solve a problem no other technology could address as efficiently. The city needed something that could move people straight up and down, and funiculars were the answer. The fact that two inclines still operate shows that the need for vertical transportation never went away, so the same infrastructure that addressed it 150 years ago still remains necessary today. Pittsburgh built tunnels, bridges, staircases, and inclines to make movement possible, but every solution was a compromise. And the compromises that made the city functional also made it the opposite of every standard American urban pattern. Because when you force a city to adapt this dramatically to its landscape, the city stops following the rules entirely. Most American cities that experience growth in the 20th century share a common path. They build dense at the center and thin out toward the edges, but they are always connected. Pittsburgh couldn't do that. The valleys created isolated pockets of development separated by unbuildable slopes. The city grew as an archipelago. Each hilltop neighborhood developed its own commercial strips, its own identity, its own sense of being a distinct place. The Golden Triangle, Pittsburgh's downtown, is a clear example of this. Two historical street grids meet at Liberty Avenue, each following a different river, which means streets that should be parallel suddenly angle into each other. Drivers used to predictable grids find themselves lost because the city doesn't follow the logic of planned development. Then there's Canton Avenue, which has a 37% grade. That means if you laid a 100-foot ladder against it, the top would be 37 feet in the air. For every 100 feet you travel forward, you climb 37 feet vertically. It's widely cited as the steepest public street in the United States, steep enough that in winter, cars with worn tires lose traction. And it's not some abandoned route. People live on Canton Avenue. The city maintains it. And it exists because the hills demand it. This is the major distinction that Pittsburgh has. Most American cities bend the land to fit the grid. Pittsburgh bent the grid to fit the hills. And once you grow up inside a city like that, you start driving, walking, and thinking differently than people almost anywhere else. In most American cities, a driver turning left at a green light waits for oncoming traffic to clear before making the turn. In Pittsburgh, the driver turning left often goes immediately before oncoming traffic moves. This is called the Pittsburgh Left. The reason for this is that Pittsburgh streets are too narrow for dedicated turn lanes. The street layout doesn't leave room for them. If left-turning drivers waited for gaps in oncoming traffic, they would block the lane behind them. So, the city developed an informal rule. When the light turns green, the first car turning left goes immediately, and oncoming traffic waits a beat to let them through. This only works because everyone understands the rule. Drivers from other cities get confused. But for locals, it's a practical adaptation to infrastructure that can't handle modern traffic. These kinds of informal adaptations exist throughout the city. Drivers learn which bridges to avoid during rush hour because a traffic jam on a bridge with no alternate route creates gridlock. Pedestrians learn which staircases are well maintained and which ones are crumbling. Residents develop mental maps of how to move through the vertical city, knowledge that a GPS route line can't really explain because it doesn't show how brutal the elevation feels in real life. The city forces people to think in 3 dimensions. You don't just navigate north, south, east, and west, you navigate up and down. A destination that looks close on a map might require descending into a valley and climbing back out. This is what happens when geography becomes more powerful than planning. The city adapts, but the adaptation is never complete. Neighborhoods also develop distinct identities because they're genuinely isolated by ridges and valleys that can't be removed. Most American cities expanded outward across flat land, building grids that could stretch as far as vehicles could carry development. They put continuous growth first, predictable layouts, and infrastructure that bent terrain to fit a predetermined pattern. Pittsburgh couldn't do any of that. Every piece of infrastructure in Pittsburgh is a negotiation with land that actively resisted development. And those negotiations created the opposite of standard American urban structure. Instead of continuous sprawl, isolated hilltop neighborhoods. Instead of predictable grids, streets that angle into each other when they should run clean and parallel. Instead of horizontal expansion, vertical infrastructure. American cities are supposed to bend terrain to the will of the car. Pittsburgh bent the car to the will of the plateau. The city exists because people found ways to negotiate with a landscape that made standard development impossible. They didn't overcome the terrain, so they adapted to it, one bridge and one flight of stairs at a time, until those adaptations became the city's defining feature. And that's why, when you drive through the Fort Pitt Tunnel and the skyline appears all at once, you're not seeing a normal American city. You're seeing the opposite.